Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to the Galt Museum. So my name is Janae Redgrave. I work here as the Community Program Coordinator. So today's program, the Galt Presents, I'm pleased to welcome back Wendy Aitkens. So Wendy is our former curator here at the Galt Museum who retired 3 years ago about. So Wendy is here to talk a bit about the history of the Lethbridge Art and Sketch Club. And the reason I invited Wendy here today is because of our special exhibit, A Painter's Paradise. Who here has had a chance to go see the exhibit? Awesome. If you haven't, you can check it out afterwards. There's some absolutely beautiful artwork by Michael Pisco and Ernest Reichman. So I'll tell you a little bit more about Wendy. So Wendy is involved with the Lethbridge Artists Club, the Archaeological Society in Lethbridge, the Military Museum, and the Historical Society. She also enjoys dragon boating and curling, as well as her enduring love of watercolor art. Let's give Wendy a warm welcome.
So I have turned my mic on. Is that sound level okay for everybody? Yep. Okay, good. Thanks, Janae. It's lovely to be invited back. And I love to have the opportunity to talk about the Lethbridge Artists Club and its history as it started as the Lethbridge Sketch Club. Since 1936, Lethbridge has had, the art community here has flourished in no small part to the existence of the Lethbridge Sketch Club, come Art Club. So for the last 83 years, art has been a major contributor to our community. Now there's lots of stimuli for art in this area, and I'm going to challenge you. Tell me some of the stimulus that you can see or that you know of that would encourage people to form a club, a group called the Lethbridge Sketch Club. Coolies. Big sky, yes. What else?
Proximity to Waterton.
Yes, yeah, and the mountains in general.
Animals and birds.
Animals and birds, absolutely, yeah.
Garden.
Well, in 1936, the garden wasn't here, but yes, nowadays it's very popular. As a matter of fact, the gardens usually opens up Thursdays to artists at a very reduced price so that we can go in there and create art. Okay, there's the lady that you see here sitting down in her long dress in 1939. That's all she ever wore, were her long dresses that she made herself. That's Miss Edith Fannie Kirk. And she was definitely an inspiration for the club, for the formation of a club. She taught, as a matter of fact, a lot of the early members of the club. And this is one of her pieces that she did at Lake Louise. And one of the joys, actually, I never learned of any painting that she did that wasn't done outdoors. So she loved to sit out in the elements and create. As a matter of fact, I think this one was taken from the roof of the chateau. Here's another important influence in the beginning of the Sketch Club. The Banff School of Fine Arts had just added visual arts to its drama programs the year before this club started. And the fellow at the top with his hand on his hip, that's H.G. Glade. And H.G. was one of the very popular instructors at the Banff School.
Wendy,
Yes?
when does Marion Biggs start showing up?
I don't know. I didn't go into a lot of the specifics of members. Yeah. So I just want you to notice what the ladies are wearing. In the 1930s, they were still going out to paint in skirts and dresses. Yes, one of them is quite short. Yeah. Okay. Now, this is the Depression era. So not very many artists had the funding to go to the Banff School, even for their summer art program. But the Provincial Institute of Technology and Art, which is now called the University of Alberta Arts, the Art University of Alberta, but it's been known as a lot of other, the Art and Design College and so on. This was the precursor. And they were able to offer scholarships. And one of the young ladies from Lethbridge was able to obtain that scholarship. And when she came back to Lethbridge, she had met another Lethbridgian there, and the two of them put their heads together and decided that they wanted a group to work with. During the Depression, supplies were expensive, and they were rare, and so scrounging amongst other artists was a real good opportunity to keep going with your own art. There was a visitor to Lethbridge. He started coming here in the late 30s, and he would come to the Banff School to teach, and then he would come here to visit his brother and his wife. Does anybody know who that gentleman was? A.Y. Jackson. So one of the group of 7 was very important here for a couple of decades in offering opportunities to talk about art and to learn about art and to go out and paint with him. But only the men got to go with him. And I'll show you a picture later on that will help you understand how that was. But A.Y. Jackson said in his 1958 autobiography, A Painter's Country, "The foothills of Alberta, with the mountains as a backdrop, afford the artist endless material." How many in this room understand that? Yeah, for sure. Yeah. There was also some very supportive families in this community, and I'm going to tell you a story of one of them. There was a lady by the name of Jessie Ursenbach, and she had 5 kids, but she had a drive, absolute imperative to create art. She would make a crayon out of a piece of charcoal from her stove so that she could do something in the arts. And her husband understood that. So one of the pieces that she painted, he and his boss from Ellison Flour Mills sent it to it would be the provincial institution to see if they could get a scholarship for her. And she won. But she didn't know anything about this. All of a sudden, her husband's saying, "Oh, you can go to the Banff School of Fine Arts. I've got 5 kids, I've got a home, I've got whatever." And he said, "No, you don't." "Well, you do, but I'm taking care of that. I'm going to bring a lady in, and she's going to take care of the kids, she's going to make our meals, and she's going to clean the house, and you are going to Banff." So that kind of family support was extremely valuable. I'm just going to give you a brief idea of the sorts of landscape. You mentioned many of them. Great structures as well as the landscape. I think most of us have painted the bridge. I haven't had the courage to try. So when Annabelle Mackenzie came back to Lethbridge with P.J. Collins, the other fellow who was at the Banff School in the summer of 1936, they got together in the fall, and they decided that they were going to invite people to Anna's home, and they started the very first sketch club. So all the names on there are artists, and it's kind of frustrating when I'm trying to find who Mrs. Mitchell is. It's very difficult to find her. I did find a little bit of information though. P.J. Collins we've already talked about. He was already an artist. Mrs. Moe was Sarah Moe, and she worked at the Campbell Clinic. I didn't find anything about Mrs. Wilson, but I believe her name is, the next one is Mrs. Doris Mitchell. Worked for the Western Grocers and Alberta Government Telephones. Joan Buss was a school teacher, and that was the group of people who got together. At the end of this meeting, Miss Mackenzie was proclaimed president, Mr. Collins was the secretary, and Mrs. Wilson was the member at large. Now, there were some very local influences here with the art. The bottom painting is by Miss Kirk. And she would have her students look at her work or work of other masters and copy them. She was teaching them technique, color, brush strokes, watercolor predominantly. And then one of her students, Tom Roycroft, did the painting of Venice. And that would have been, I believe, one of Miss Kirk's own paintings that he was taught to copy. So that's an excellent way to learn technique, but it's also very frustrating. Jessie Ursenbach said, oh, we copied and we copied and we copied. And she was getting so tired of that. But it wasn't the only influence that Edith Kirk introduced. She was very inspired by some of the Impressionists, especially Cézanne. And so she was encouraging the free flow, the use of color that represents some of the Impressionists. Okay. This is where Miss Kirk got outdoors to paint. She would go out with people in the neighborhood here to paint, but she also wanted to get into the mountains, absolutely loved the mountains. And she joined the Alpine Club of Canada at the age of 60 after she moved here. And she didn't go to climb mountains, she went to paint. And this is her, right here. Has this got a clicker? Center? Ah, there. There she is. Right in the middle, still wearing her long dress and her sweater. And she would go out and camp out in the mountains for weeks on end and just go in and out around camp so that she could paint. Had she tried to join the Alpine Club in England, she wouldn't have been allowed to. It was an all-male purview. This is another fellow who was an influence to the artists in this area. He worked for the CPR in the irrigation department, but he was an internationally recognized artist. His painting of the prairie often had low horizon lines with great expanses of sky. And he was associated with other prominent Canadians such as Phillips, Layton, and de Grandmaison. The roster of teachers at the Banff School of Fine Arts, of course, was an influence. A.C. Layton, Glade, Jackson, and Phillips. And this is a sketch done by A.Y. Jackson. And it was tucked away in Jessie Ursenbach's scrapbook. So Jessie was taking a summer class. He happened to be the instructor, and he was teaching how to do reflection in the water. And at the end, he handed her his sketch. He didn't sign it, but in her sketch, in her scrapbook, she writes that it was given to her at the end of the class. So it's a delight. We have a few A.Y. Jacksons from the Lethbridge Art Gallery and one little one here. One of the influences that Jackson had with people was things like his approach to the artwork. And he said, he asked the artists with him to try and paint, in quotes, the character of the scene rather than a pretty picture. So the club was very makeshift. Their first meeting was in Anna Mackenzie's home. They wanted a place to meet, they wanted a place to paint, and this was the very first place they went to, our old public library. They then moved into the YMCA, And this is where Edith Kirk taught a lot of her classes as well. So they must have had rooms that were suitable for painting classes and for meetings. Eventually, they went into the Bowman Center. But one of the artists, Kathleen Young, recalls art sessions in the Kinsman skating hut. And she described it as bitterly cold with only limited heat coming from the wood stove. Boy, artists can be determined, can't they? So they got established as a group. They started to offer classes to paint, or they gathered together to paint. And then they started to do exhibitions. But Lethbridge didn't have a gallery in those years, so they were very creative. They did presentations and exhibitions in places like the furniture department at Eaton's. They convinced Mr. Balaam to get all the cars out of his car showroom, and they used it as an exhibit space. Very persuasive people. They were also up on the upper floor of the Woolworth building. They were able to arrange for a couple of traveling exhibits that came from the Banff School of Fine Arts. So for several years, it would be a traveling show put together by the Banff School. And so the club would arrange for a space, and they would bring that traveling exhibit in. So lots of instructors came to this area or lived in the area. So Reithman had many times come to present classes and to teach art. He was born in Switzerland, studied in Europe, and he emigrated to Lethbridge in 1919, where he worked as an interior decorator. And I gather some of his homes were very, very posh, very European in its influence. There's more you'll learn about Reithman when you go into the exhibit hall. Bart Pfeffer was a very popular artist. He was born in Saskatchewan, studied at the Winnipeg School of Art and the Artists' School in Montreal. He was also at the Chicago Art Institute, and he became eventually the principal of the Winnipeg School of Art. He taught across the US and Canada, and then he moved to Lethbridge in 1959, where he lived for several years before moving to Edmonton to take over a job there as a professor at the University of Alberta in the art department. A.C. Layton, born and trained in England. 1924, he came to Canada to work and paint for the Canadian Pacific Railway. So I suspect most of you are aware of the wonderful poster-like artwork that the CPR used to promote its train trips into the mountains. Well, Layton was one of the very prolific artists there. He was then offered a position at the Provincial Institute of Technology, which he did go to and work. And then 2 years later, he and H.G. Glade founded the Alberta Society of Artists. And that was a fairly prestigious art society, like those in England and down east. You had to be invited to join. You had to really prove yourself before you were invited to join. And you had to be twice as good if you were a female to be asked to join. Layton, probably you will know that name. What other places in southern Alberta is associated with Layton? The Layton Center, that's right. That was where he and his wife built a home, and they eventually turned it into an art center, and it's still going today with the help of a foundation. Another artist from nearby. She's from Fort Macleod. She was a lady who stayed at home to take care of her sister's household and her mother and father, but she was able to get away to get some training in Toronto, and she became very well known for painting grain elevators. Now that well-known attitude was from the distance. Local people would say, why are you painting those old buildings, those old relics? But she really wanted to capture them. She thought that when you look across the flat prairie and all of a sudden you see these large elevators coming out of the ground, that was to her a really important part of what Alberta was all about and the agriculture. She also painted wildflowers, but she wasn't looking at them in that true scientific type of art. She chose her wildflowers and painted them within their environment. So the little ecosystem that she would paint would be appropriate to where those plants would actually be living. Walter J. Phillips, born in England, trained in Birmingham, South Africa, and Paris, emigrated to Canada in 1913. By 1940, he began teaching art and printmaking at the Banff School and the Institute in Calgary. So he had trained with some Japanese masters, and he actually was a real great influence for printmaking here in southern Alberta. He was also a fine watercolor artist in the English tradition, which is what Edith Kirk was mainly covering. But his woodcuts actually brought him in enough funding, enough money to live with his art, which was, of course, rare. H.G. Glade was a frequent instructor at the Calgary School the Calgary Art School in Calgary and at the U of A, and he was a real proponent for painting outdoors. So the art club members were taking classes whenever they could bring someone like some of these folks from the Banff School to Lethbridge. They would open up a class for the community to join them and learn from. But they also offered lots of classes, and they had some of their own classes where you could just drop in. So life drawing, still life with fruits and with vegetables and with flowers and so on. So they were constantly busy. And I've read some of their month-long offerings, and there was almost something every day that they offered. So the early members came from a wide spectrum of life. As I mentioned, Annabelle Mackenzie was a homemaker. P.J. Collins, school teacher, and he was St. Augustine's choir leader and later an art instructor. Robert Barrowman was a business owner and a mayor. Sarah Anderson was a school teacher, and she was a member of the mental health board. Does anybody know Miss Burkett's name? How to say that first name? It's very unusual. Thyrzah. Thyrza? Thank you. Thyrza Young Burkett. She was from a fairly well-off family, and she fell in love with the First Nations in this area, and she painted individual portraits of them and put images around their events and so on. Don Frake, does anybody know that name? Yeah, there's several buildings in this city that have portraits by Don Frake. This is a piece that's in the collection here. So he was a magazine illustrator in Toronto and New York before returning to Coaldale, where his family lived. And he continued his art here. He also would teach for the art club. There was also a fellow by the name of William or Bill Fruitt, who was a well-known school kids photographer who was an artist. Percy Henson was here, and I think you can see very clearly how influenced he was by spending time with A.Y. Jackson. He was the secretary of the YMCA and a director eventually of the Edmonton Art Gallery. Margaret Skeleton owned and operated Skeleton's jewelry store. And this is a print that I have owned for years. My brother gave it to me years ago, long before I knew I'd be moving back to Lethbridge, long before I even knew that Margaret Skeleton was from Lethbridge. and it is, has a pride of place in my home. Ernest Reithman, I mentioned, was an interior decorator. Michael Pisco was a commercial artist. Rita Rovenko was a registered nurse. Jesse Ersenbach. Oops, there's Michael. Another one that's strong influences from A.Y. Jackson. Oh, sorry. There's Jesse. Jesse did a lot of floral work, just an amazing, amazingly prolific artist. And Dr. Tim Brown was chief of obstetrics at St. Michael's. So people from all the different communities in Lethbridge. Now Lethbridge, the special exhibits that the early clubs started has continued. In 1967, the community of artists came together for a show to celebrate Canada's 100th anniversary. The Galt Museum invited our club to come and celebrate the sequicentennial, the 150 years. And so many of the members put in some artwork, and there was a lovely exhibit downstairs. In 2009, the Galt was celebrating the 100 years of the bridge. And so the club joined us again that year and contributed many pieces that all reflected the bridge. But in 2016, the Lethbridge Artists Club had, to me, just an absolutely extraordinary celebration of their own 80th anniversary. And the idea came to a meeting one day that they should have a portrait competition. And the lady sitting in the back, Linda, was absolutely bitten by a bug right then. And with her influence and several other committee members, Alex Back, Fran Hutton, Annalie Jansen, and Gail Russell, they put together a committee that decided that they would put together this competition and invite people from the art community to do portraits of significant people in the community. Oh, but just a minute, who do we invite to be the important people from our community? So they put out a call and asked the community, who do you think we should honor with a portrait? And the names started to flow in. So Linda and her committee invited all of those people to come to the Casa, where artists were invited to come and sketch. And from those sketches, artists were chosen to do a finished portrait. So I think there were 22 portraits in all? 21. And so these artists went back to their own studios and they created these wonderful portraits. And the very first image that you saw as you came in, the one of Lars, that's Sue Wilkie's portrait of Lars Notch. Here's a wonderful portrait of who? Does anybody recognize her? Mary Ort, yes, yes. This is Lynn Dewhurst's portrait of Mary. So the 22 portraits were first shown at Casa, and judges went through them and chose 9 or 10. And Linda and her committee had gotten in touch with several different museums across southern Alberta and asked if they would take a smaller version of this show. And when she talked to me, I said, yes, please, as long as we get to be the last. I want the finalists here. And so as this traveled around, people were invited to vote for their People's Choice. And then once the 10 images hung here, a different set of judges came and they chose the finalists and counted the votes for all of the People's Choice. So this was a lovely charcoal by Patricia Sorensen, and it was called Diane, and this was chosen as the winner. this portrait of Andy, not Andy, Charlie Russell, thank you. Andy was his dad. Charlie Russell was by Fran Hutton, and this was the overall choice for people. But that was back in when? 2016. 83 years now is how old the art club is, and it's still thriving. And I wanted to show you some of the work that is being done today. This one by Karina Mack, who is sitting at the back. Ivan Bering. Denise Savard. Sue Wilkie. Cassandra Elrod. And that's two of our members sitting outside enjoying the October art retreat and the nice warm weather that day. And that's Police Outpost Lake. So each year, the club invites artists to come out to Mountain View. We stay in a lovely B&B out there. And you can either set up your paints and stay there in the house and paint to your heart's content for 3-4 days, or you can go out and enjoy painting en plein air, and then come back to the house and finish your paintings there. So this club has offered a great deal to Lethbridge, continues to. It's a healthy organization. I expect it to continue well into the future, and it provides a huge opportunity for people to learn about art, to see the art, to buy the art. Every Christmas, the Artists Club has a sale at Cass's Christmas sale, and people are invited to come in and have a look at the art and purchase it. And so, very thriving art community here. Thank you very much.
Does anyone have any questions for Wendy? Thank you so much, Wendy.
Yeah, you're welcome. My pleasure. Janae had a question that I didn't find the answer to, and that's when did the Lethbridge Sketch Club change its name to the Lethbridge Art Club? Pardon, Sue?
I think late 90s, but I'm not sure.
Late 90s?
I think it's written up in the booklet from the portrait competition.
Oh, is it there?
I think there's a date in it.
I'm sorry I missed that.
They advertised the 50th anniversary.
Okay.
I think that it may say it there.
Yeah.
They say it in the
Do you remember them saying why they changed it?
Controversial. It was controversial and it didn't make everybody happy.
Okay.
Well, I think the other thing is that the club wanted to be more inclusive of the visual arts, like sketch suggests certain things,
Yes.
whereas artists, we have people that work in three-dimensional work and all sorts of media, and just to be a more inclusive artist.
Yeah. To represent what's actually going on in the club more accurately, perhaps?
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. And thanks
Thank you
again
so
for
much,
inviting
Wendy.
me.
Yes. Well, let's give Wendy another round of applause. And there definitely are some talented artists in this room, so I was really happy to see some of the current work being done. Very beautiful.
Absolutely. I had to brag about what's being produced today because it's just extraordinary art.
Yeah, for sure. So I just wanted to mention 2 upcoming programs. So you may have noticed there's a new exhibit going up in the hallway. There's a couple panels that are going to go in here. That exhibit is about World War I internment camp. And on Thursday the 13th, we have a talk from 7 till 8 by Ben Wiestra, who was one of the students who helped put the exhibit together, the Lethbridge portion of it.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so that's that. And then our next Wednesday afternoon program is on the 18th, And Trish Perkis will be here to talk about music during the Second World War. And that's to go along with another upcoming exhibit we have. I want to thank you all for coming today, and please go check out the beautiful exhibit. Thank you.